Well, hello, welcome once again to the Aftermath. And this is the He Said, She Said segment. And we're going to talk about Joe Cordell. And this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital Smith, and the legislative advocate, Kendra. And I think it's a little bit cold. Is that right, Kendra? How are you
Oh
doing?
my oh my goodness, Mick. So we were 40 degrees yesterday, 40 above zero. And today we are negative 40 degrees with a wind chill.
So, where are you in Nome, Alaska?
I know, right?
The
Little
Arctic?
Ohio here, and it's
Antarctica?
crazy.
That is crazy. I mean, it's cold. You know, I was in Pennsylvania and I know it's cold, but I don't think it got ever that bad. So, hanging
Yeah,
in
they
there.
actually said for 3 hours in the middle of the night last night that we actually hit the criteria for a blizzard. So the last blizzard we had was in 1978, I believe. And so now I can say I've lived through a blizzard.
Lived and survived, but,
Yes.
got your hat on, got your good socks on, got a sweater.
Yes. My blanket, my heater. It's crazy.
Well, hopefully you're surviving. It's a holiday, so enjoy the holiday then, regardless of the weather, right?
Yes. Yes.
So we're here to talk about Joe Cordell, who was on the show recently, and it was really interesting because we had very interesting background. I'd like to make some comments, or he said, she said things, and I wanted to say some things too, Kendra, but jump in. What I found interesting was a couple things. Been given the fact that I'm both a historian and a historian of religions by training, I always tell people I'm academic, but in recovery. So all the religions, the major religions of the world frown on divorce. But one of the things, the reason why is because it's so difficult. And I think that's something we can attest to. So this divorce, parental alienation, and healing from it is such a difficult process that really, in terms of world religions, they're trying to get people and stay together. So I always say to people, look out for some local community, church, synagogue, something like that. They can help. The other thing I thought was interesting, I wanted to comment on is when I was going through my process of burning America, I said, I tried to find some places that were more compatible or easier to deal with. And I had heard that some rural areas or Western states might be better because this was back in the 19th century. The odd thing for us today is the fact men would get custody. And the reason they got custody was because they could at least survive with the child and they made money. They weren't thinking necessarily about nurturing a child like maybe a mother could do, but they were saying, okay, you would survive. So those are some of the things that I thought would kick us off. And those are some of the initial comments on this segment I thought would be helpful.
Yeah, and just to speak to the world and as far as marriages and divorces, at least Sweden has it kind of nailed down with the custody where automatically when you are separating, they go into 50-50. So in Sweden, they're not seeing things like the rest of the world is seeing things in a divorce or custody battles because they're starting off 50-50 and basically forcing the parents to get along. So as far as getting married and divorced, I guess Sweden's where you got to go for it if you're going to get
Yeah.
divorced.
And it's the fact that, the Europeans are often really good on healthcare and things like that. Anyway, that's one of the things that with that system. So they're probably more conscious of it. And I think it's probably a really good idea to say that's from the get-go. Look, you may be divorcing, but that doesn't mean you're divorcing your child. And you got to make sure there's a clear distinction and just assume 50-50 from the very beginning. I think you pointed out something, this was during the episode itself, that they're looking at, well, you're using the courts less, you're using the attorneys less. And, because people have already got in their head, you're going to have to get along. You may not want to live with that person. You may not want to be married to that person, but you're going to stay involved with the child.
Yes, 100%, Mick. And I think you hit the nail on the head. You're divorcing your partner, but you're not divorcing your kids. And I think America has a long way to go to get to the point where Sweden is. I think there's some states, as I mentioned, that are adopting this, but and writing it into rule, but it's a slow go. So we have hopes. Maybe there's change.
It's an uphill battle, and I believe it's Kentucky that we're saying that we think Kentucky is doing well and is trying to keep some of those ideas in mind that the co-parenting is what's going to be the assumption from the very beginning, and then that would cut down on the alienation of one parent of trying to keep the other parent out of the children's lives.
Yes. And, you bring up a good point when you talk alienation. Joe was very good at pointing out that the protection order is used as a weapon. And how this is used is because the protection order is filed. They represent men. So he thought 90%, 99% was men, right? And I pointed out, well, I'm the 1% of the women that
Mhm.
obviously this is happening to. So I think it's definitely a growing phenomenon that both sex can figure this out on how to do it. Um, and, but if you file a protection order against someone with the presumption, which is what he said, the presumption, which is just accusations, you do not have to have proof at that point, then that is when the parent starts to separate the children from the other parent and the alienation begins. And that's where we fall into the trap of the court system is involved and it's a slow process. And Joe agreed. And Joe said that this is common. This is very, very common.
Yeah, so it can be as a weapon. So the element of proof is lessened when it's a protection order. And that's what the assumption is, that you don't have to show a whole lot of evidence. You're simply making an accusation. And so they err on the side of, well, no one, as he pointed out, a judge or an attorney doesn't want to be the one who said, oh, no, we denied that protection order and then something bad happened. So they don't want to make the nightly news. And so they're inclined to just go ahead with it. But the problem, of course, as you're pointing out, is that it's so easy that then it can be used as a tool, which it has been in the process. And that's a difficulty that doesn't come up when you need more evidence and you have to have more credibility when it comes to some other actions that might be taken.
Yes. Yes. And, Joe pointed out that most of this is happening to the men. And I don't disagree with that. I think 30 some years ago when they started the business, and again, he is an attorney and founder of Cordell and Cordell Associates, which represents the rights of men. So when he started the business 30 some years ago, I bet this was happening to a lot of men. And I bet there was a lot of accusations, false accusations of abuse, and protection orders were filed. And judges just assume, like you said, they don't want to be on the news, that they went against it. And so that is how men started separating from their children. Not that they wanted to. Now I think it is the new phenomenon that it could happen to women.
Yeah, and I pointed out because when you get into the men versus women kind of argument, this is where I said, well, I kind of turned a deaf ear because I'm not blaming anybody, but what I'm saying is that it's the entire industry, and I call it a custody industry. That's what's at fault. So it's not the individual situation because I would point out, Kendra, that I know women who have been in the same situation that you're in. I said, so
Mhm.
you can't generalize and you can't say, it's men, it's women. It's individual craziness of the custody industry and the problems and the mistakes that they make. And it's not confined to anybody. But that's the frightening thing about it, that it's so out of control and it isn't a kind of industry that you can rely on because there is no reliability in many ways. They are not working for the best interest of the children and they are not helping the people going through a very difficult and chaotic process. So it can happen to anybody and the crazy things can happen to anyone. That's why I'm saying I wouldn't take sides. I mean, it's like, no, you're missing the point. We have to reform the system. That's the solution.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And when you talk about the men versus women, I know he was talking about a little bit of the history and, how men in their early age, or I guess actually a little later, I think he said in their 40s and 50s, are having affairs and choosing the divorce. And I don't think that in most states anymore that it matters why the divorce happened. It used to. Now
Mhm.
it doesn't matter anymore. And I don't have the legal term on the tip of my tongue here, but basically it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't matter who's at fault. It's just you need to move on. And now, we're agreeing to a divorce and here's how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, it's a no fault divorce. And so when you
Yes.
have the no fault divorce, then it's like, well, the divorce rate skyrocketed. So nobody wants to be told what they should and should not do and who's fooling around with whom. On the other hand, when you have the no fault, well, then it's easier then, right? So it's a really easy process to get divorced. In some ways, you'd say, well, maybe kind of like cool your jets a little bit. Think about this. Think about the impact that it's going to have on you and your children. Maybe this is not what you want. So I'm hoping that people would kind of reconsider and try to reconcile if it's at all possible.
Yes. Yeah, I hope so too. And I don't think that is probably true. I'm not going to disagree with Joe completely, but I'm guessing that the stats that he said as far as men's having an affair as they get older and they are more well established in their career, that couldn't actually happen earlier. Maybe in fear of a wife that does have the career together, and maybe is fearing that the control and he's losing control in the relationship. So I don't know if that's exactly fair statement to say, because I think affairs can happen whenever. And it, again, regardless, we need to look at the best interest of the children because divorces happen.
Yeah, and I think he had pointed out, he's saying these are stereotypes, so he's not saying this is in every instance, but
Yes.
the problem with, let's say, the man, it's the midlife crisis, right? So the guy has been working, and if he's in his 30s and he's 40s, he's achieved something. But what often happens is the midlife crisis. They go, well, did I make a mistake? Am I truly in love with my wife? And they start looking around, they have the wandering eye. So maybe it's common and maybe it's not, but that was a stereotype. I think that's what he's describing. But yes, wandering eyes can happen at any time for people. You just got to stay right and know who you're with and know that that's the person you want to be and work at it too. It takes work.
Yes. Agreed. Agreed. It does. Every relationship takes work.
You bet.
So Joe was very interesting to talk to, only because I think that, or one reason, not only because, but because he actually is the founder, and they're involved in, I think he said 38 states.
I think 40,
Um,
42, over 300 attorneys
42.
in over 42 states. Yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah. So they are definitely seeing the trend. They're
Yes.
seeing what's happening out there. He didn't agree with the 50-50. We kind of disagreed on that a little bit, on the
Yeah.
50-50 shared parenting or equal rights parenting. And I will find it very interesting to see how it shifts moving forward in the future.
Wouldn't it be interesting? And this is something that came up in the episode. We should have a panel and maybe have a panel and talk about these things. I think it would be really a fascinating discussion to get some of these attorneys and to say, ask them some pointed questions on what they think. And I thought that's probably the really advantage of having Joe on too, because this is the first attorney that we had. And it's really valuable, insightful that he had what he had to say.
Yes, agreed. I don't think he liked the point that if we go 50-50, it'll probably be less attorneys involved because that's less money for him. But Joe did say he wants to move on in his career and do something more fun.
That's something, and it's an interesting insight. Now that he's been in his career for a while, he's looking for the more peaceful kinds of things. He wants to do things that are not quite so contentious. So yeah, maybe there's something to that.
Yes, yes. And I could see that. Well, Mick, that was about all I had from Joe. Again, I think, to sum it up, I don't think it's a sex issue. I think it can happen to men or women.
Yeah.
And I think now what they're representing, or what they started representing 30 some years ago, is happening to women. So I think they need to fight for the rights of parents that are being shoved out of the children's lives for wrongful reasons.
You bet. Children should be number one. That's what we're saying all the way through.
Yes.
All right. So that sounds good. I appreciate your comments and try to stay warm, Kendra. I know it's cold there.
Thanks, Mick.
You bet. Thanks for listening, everybody. And don't forget to subscribe. How do they subscribe again, Kendra?
Hey, if you go to our show on Apple Podcast or Google Play, you can actually scroll down and hit subscribe. If you subscribe, that you'll get notified when we load new episodes, which is a
Sounds
couple a
awesome.
week right now.
Yes. So everybody do that. So subscribe, like, share, listen, and of course, make sure that you're positively reviewing us on Apple Podcast. Listening, everybody, we appreciate it. Until next time, this is the Aftermath signing out. Deus Volt.